Just think of that. There used to be a very wonderful bust of Locke in the lobby of the British Art Center. And I used to recommend to students when they were down in that part of campus to stop in and look at his face, because as with Machiavelli and others, the face is very revealing. And I used to ask people to see, do you detect in here the sense of the master of taciturnity that was so that his college master had discussed. Locke was a private secretary and a physician to a man named Anthony Ashley Cooper, later known as Lord Shaftesbury. Shaftesbury had a circle, the Shaftesbury circle of political followers who were opponents of the monarchy and who were forced into exile in 1683. Locke followed them into exile. He spent several years in Holland in 1683 before returning to England, again shortly before the Whig Revolution, where his book, the Second Treatise, was published, and where he lived until his death in 1704. Just 2 years ago, in fact, Yale at the Beinecke Library held a major conference in commemoration of the 300th anniversary of the death of Mr. Locke. So those are a few things about his contributions and his context. I want to begin today the substantive part of this talk by focusing on the theme that in many ways forms the central core of Locke's political doctrine, his theory of natural law. This is a term that has come up from time to time. There is no modern thinker that I'm aware of who makes natural law as important to his doctrine as does Locke. The best way to observe the working, or to reconstruct the working of natural law, is to follow a procedure that we have seen before, to think about what is the condition of nature, the state of nature, where we can see the natural law in its operative form. The state of nature for Locke, in many ways as for Hobbes, is not a condition of ruling and being ruled as it is for Aristotle. The state of nature is not a political condition. Locke describes the state of nature as a condition of perfect freedom. Well, Aristotle said that we were by nature members of a family, a polis, a moral community of some kind, bound by ties of civic or family obligation. Locke understands by the state of nature a condition without civil authority or civil obligations. The state of nature is not for him an historical condition, although he does occasionally refer to the vast tracts of North America as suggesting a condition of nature. But the state of nature is a kind of thought experiment. What is human nature like in the absence of authority? The state of nature, Locke suggests to us, is not an amoral condition as it was for Hobbes. It is not simply a condition of war of all against all. The state of nature, he tells us, is in fact a moral condition. It is governed by a moral law or a natural law that dictates peace and sociability. There is a moral law of nature that determines that no one should harm another person in their life, liberty, or possessions. This law, this natural law, Locke affirms, willeth the peace and preservation of all mankind. So the natural condition for Locke is a moral state, one in which a natural law, again, dictates the peace and preservation. It is not a war of all against all. Locke's natural law in some ways seems like a very traditional form of moral law, familiar to readers of his time, readers who would have been familiar with the natural law tradition going back to Cicero, the Roman Stoics, St. Thomas Aquinas, and in Locke's own day, an important Anglican divine by the name of Richard Hooker. Locke's theory of moral law or natural law sounds comforting and traditional, and to some degree it is. All civil authority has its foundation in a law of reason that is knowable by virtue of our rational capacities alone. The law of nature declares, according to Locke, that we are all, in his famous term, the workmanship of one omnipotent and infinitely wise maker. And as products of divine workmanship, we ought never to harm anyone in their lives, liberties, or possessions. Locke, again, seems to effortlessly weave together the Stoic tradition of natural law with these Christian ideas of divine workmanship into one seamless whole. You can see the way in which Locke's rhetoric here, in his writing, brings together different strands of the philosophical and theological tradition, weaving them together in a kind of effortless whole almost. Do not be simply seduced by this. Because even within, why do I say that? Because even within the same paragraphs, Locke's natural law, the law that again mandates or dictates peace and preservation of all mankind, turns into a right of self-preservation. From the beginning, you have to say it is not altogether clear even whether the natural law is a theory of moral duty, duties that we have to preserve others, duties and obligations, or whether it is a theory of natural rights that mandates that the highest priority be given to individual self-preservation and whatever is necessary to achieve the preservation of the individual. The state of nature is a condition without civil authority. The law of nature, in other words, has no person or office to oversee its enforcement or its application. So the state of nature that he once describes, or early describes in the book, as a condition of peace and mutual distrust, quickly degenerates into a condition of civil war, or of war, where every individual serves as the judge, jury, and executioner of the natural law. The state of nature quickly becomes a Hobbesian condition of essentially every man for himself. Consider the following passage in section 11 of the second treatise. The damnified person, Locke writes, someone who has been mistreated in the condition of nature. The damnified person who's been injured or mistreated has this power of appropriating to himself the goods or services of the offender by the right of self-preservation, as every man has a power to punish the crime to prevent it being committed again, by the right he has of preserving all mankind and doing all reasonable things he can in order to that end. In other words, if you feel or if you have been wronged or feel you have been wronged in the state of nature, you have, according to the natural law for Locke, the right to, as he puts it, appropriate to yourselves the goods or services of the offender. And you have that to take from them their goods, their property, their services in some way, whatever you feel appropriate as, again, the person who has suffered some kind of wrong. Every person becomes, as it were, judge and executioner of the law of nature. The fundamental law of nature, Locke says here, is the right of self-preservation. And this states that each person is empowered to do, again, whatever is in his power to preserve him or herself. Again, consider the following in section 16. And one may destroy a man who makes war upon him, may destroy another who makes war upon you, or has discovered an enmity to his being for the same reason that he may kill a wolf or a lion. because such men are not under the ties of the common law of reason. They have no other rule but that of force and violence. So also they may be treated as beasts of prey, those dangerous or noxious creatures that will be sure to destroy him whenever he falls into their power. Listen to that language. From an original moral condition where we are under a natural law not to harm others, a law to preserve and protect the well-being of others of our kind, we have become like lions and wolves to each other, beasts of prey and other noxious creatures. What is the state of nature? But in the words of Dorothy Gale, lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my. This is what we are to one another. This is what I've come to think of as Locke's bestiary. And in fact, the second treatise is rife with language of comparing human beings to, and our behavior to, animals. He speaks about lions and wolves. Elsewhere, he speaks about polecats and skunks and foxes and all. If in fact we are all beings, as he says, created under a natural law, we seem to quickly degenerate into almost bestial behavior, beasts of prey, far from being cooperative and peace-seeking creatures. The very freedom that such beings as ourselves enjoy in the state of nature leads us to abuse that freedom, and in turn requires or is at the basis of the need for civil government. However, in the meantime, the question that any reader of the second treatise